In this devotional, I'm going to share with you 3 thoughts from Psalm 22, verses 1 through 11, where I'll ask the question, do you feel God's forsaken you? Psalm 22, verses 1 through 11 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. I think most people have had this feeling. They've had this sense that they have been forgotten by God. I think most people at some point in their life, in the midst of their suffering, in the midst of the pain inherent in this world, they have thought that God has forsaken him, that God has left them, that God no longer cares about what is happening to them. And here in Psalm 22, we see that even David, the man who chased after God's own heart, had this same feeling. And it's because this feeling is so common. It's because so many people feel it. It's important for us to read this psalm and understand that it is not uncommon for us to feel like God has forsaken us. So here are 3 thoughts from Psalm 22, verses 1 through 11, dealing with that very issue. Thought number 1, David. David is oftentimes viewed as the great hero. He's the one who defeated Goliath, right? He's the one who becomes king over Israel. From shepherd to king, that's a big jump. But we often forget that David also suffered greatly. That David had one of his closest friends chasing after him, trying to kill him. That David's own son launched a coup attempt in order to oust him from the throne. We oftentimes forget that David suffered so very much in this life. And as we look at this psalm, we see him reflecting on that feeling that many of us have felt, that maybe God has forsaken us. But even while he is reflecting on that and talking about it, he recognizes that it is only the Lord upon whom he can rely, because it is God himself that is ultimately going to care for him in the midst of adversity. Thought number 2, Christ. Don't be surprised that Christ quotes this psalm on the cross. And a lot of people think that when Christ says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" that maybe he went and said the entire psalm. Maybe he recited the whole thing. At the very least, in the minds of the people there, the Jewish folks who were familiar with the Psalms, they would automatically start playing the whole of the psalm in their mind. And this is something that happens to us quite frequently. You hear a little part of a particular song, a little lyric here or there, and all of a sudden you remember the entire song. It gets stuck in your head. And I think that when Christ on the cross says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" that he isn't just indicating that the sins of the world have been placed upon him, but he's also indicating that in this moment he's experiencing much of the same sort of feelings that David himself experienced in the midst of his suffering. But what we need to realize is that even though David and Christ may have felt like they had experienced God forsaking them, it is here on the cross that Jesus Christ is at his most obedient. It is here on the cross when he is performing the most difficult part of the Father's will in obedience to him. And that's something that we shouldn't forget, even though he might have been feeling a little bit like God had forsaken him. Thought number 3, the Father. Even though David says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" he recognizes that it is the Father who cares for him. He recognizes that his only hope is in God. And this is something that Jesus, too, brings to mind as he is suffering on the cross. That the Father that this psalm is referring to is ultimately going to care for him, even though he is in the midst of trial. And this is something that we should trust in. We should trust that even though we might feel like we have been forsaken by God, that the Lord is faithful to fulfill his promises. That even though we might not be experiencing the presence of God in the moment, that the Lord is still faithful, that he still will do that which he has said. And our feeling like he has forsaken us does not mean that he has. It simply means that in the midst of our trial, in the midst of our suffering, that we are not properly recognizing the faithfulness of God in all circumstances. Do you feel like God's forsaken you? You might feel that way, but oftentimes our feelings are wrong. And if you are one of God's children, if he has called you by his own name and brought you into his own family, then he has not forsaken you. These three thoughts come from the assigned reading of Psalms 21 through 23. If you'd like to read through the Bible with me, you can do so by subscribing to this channel, by clicking on the link in the description, or by joining the Facebook group Through the Bible, where we are reading the text of Scripture together.